Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Congratulations, Bobby. All right. Don't you want to be in my seat right now? So, Bobby, I wanted to start with just the why question. I mean, your family is probably the most famous political family in the entire United States. And for the first 60 plus years of your life, you really didn't do anything political. You know, what's happened to drive you to run for president of the United States?
First of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for hosting this event. And I'm very, very happy to be here in Michigan. I love coming to this state. There's strong ties to my family in this state. Two of my favorite doctors, Dr. Brown. Can you guys hear me? Hello? And I was saying that two of my favorite doctors, Dr. New and Dr. Brownstein, are in this. And my polling numbers are actually, of the states that have been polled, are better in Michigan than any. I'm at 27 points. In a three-way race. So they're already, today they put up billboards, the DNC, not for me, but against me. All publicity is good publicity. Anyway, they put up 4 of them in Grand Rapids today. I know that DNC is worried about my popularity in that state. You know, I was in the center of politics. Or it's not really accurate to say I wasn't in politics, because I was at the edge, let me say, the edge of politics for most of my life. I considered at one point running for Attorney General in New York State. And then I was asked by the governor when Hillary Clinton moved to the State Department, I considered running for that Senate seat, which is my dad's seat. And then I decided not to. I had family issues at that time, which made it was not a good time for me to run. And then when Hillary moved from that seat, she ran instead of me. She won the seat, and she ran for president, lost. And Barack Obama appointed her to Secretary of State. At that time, the governor of New York called me and asked me to fill her space. So he had the right to appoint somebody to take that space. And I said, can you give me 24 hours to think about it? And I, again, for the same reasons, because of issues in my family, I decided not to. But it's not something I had an allergy to. But it's also not something I never imagined running for president. And the reason that I decided to now is because I just saw what was happening to my country. It had made my country and my political party had made these radical departures from what I knew to be right. I felt like people, including people I respected, who I knew, people who I loved, had forgotten what America is supposed to look like. You know, that we're supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. We're not supposed to be governing our country through fear. And Franklin Roosevelt said in 1932, during his first inaugural, he said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he was saying something very profound at that point. As the world was in a global depression, and he saw what was happening in Europe, and he saw that unscrupulous leaders and demagogues were using the power of fear to get people to leave what they knew was right, which was democratic process and consensual politics, and move towards totalitarianism, either totalitarianism of the left, as was happening in Eastern Europe and Russia, or totalitarianism of the right, which was happening in France, in Italy, and in Germany at that time. And he saw that all of those leaders had one tool that they all had in common, which was the use of fear and scapegoating, pointing to one group of people or another, and then pumping up fear among the public. And they understood that fear incapacitates our capacity for critical thinking, and that it makes people who are inclined by their value system toward democracy, toward self-sovereignty, it makes them willing to give up their own control of their own lives, their control of their communities, their control of their country, to powerful figures, the man on horseback, the authoritarian control. And Roosevelt was saying, we can't do that. When he said that in 1932, 60% of the people in this country had lost faith in democracy and capitalism, and 30% wanted to move to a fascist system, 30% wanted to move to a communist system. And he said, we're not going to do any of those things. We're going to hold our course. We're going to buckle in, and we're going to take this ride, but we're going to do it without fear. And he kept this country on track. He restored faith in Wall Street. He restored public faith in the banks, and slowly put the country back together again without going to one side or the other. So when I saw, particularly during COVID, this just blatant use of fear to engineer compliance from the public with things that I knew were wrong, just the dismantling of the entire Constitution in front of my eyes, that they first started with censorship, and they started censoring people. They said, people like me are dangerous, and the public needs to be protected from dangerous thoughts. And Hamilton, Madison, Adams said they put the freedom of expression, the right to freedom of expression in the First Amendment, because all the other rights are dependent on it. If a government has the power to silence its critics, it has a license for any kind of atrocity. And that's exactly what happened. And as soon as they figured out that they could silence me, like people like me and Dr. New, and Dr. Brownstein and many, many others, they said, okay, the public is going to put up with this, and now we're going to dismantle all the other rights. And they went after freedom of religion, the right to worship. They closed every church in our country for a year with no due process, no scientific citation, and a couple of weeks ago, Anthony Fauci just admitted all these rules, social distancing, just came out of somewhere. That's what he said. It just appeared one day. There was like nothing to it. I saw they were lying about science. I heard this phrase again and again, trust the experts. From Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper and everybody, we're all in it together. Trust the expert. I knew we weren't all in it together. Anderson Cooper was making $20 million a year. And meanwhile, everybody else was, free from their jobs. And I knew that you're not supposed to trust the experts is not a thing. It's not. It's certainly not a feature of science. And it definitely is not a feature of democracy. It's a feature of religion, and it's a feature of totalitarianism. The things that this country represents, which are democracy and then policy, science-based, fact-based evidence. You don't trust the experts. You constantly question the experts. And my uncle knew that. My uncle was president during the a big crisis. I mean, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, the vote when he started with the XCOM committee, it was the 13 graybeards of the intelligence apparatus, the diplomats like Dean Acheson, people from the State Department, the experts, the military brass. 11 out of 13 said we need to invade Cuba. And there were only two, Bob McNamara, my father, who said, wait a minute, that's not a good idea. That means bombing those missile emplacements, 64 missile emplacements the Russians had put in there. They had a Russian gun crews. And nobody knew who was going to give the order to launch. We now know, 30 years later, we found out at a conference when the Russians, everybody who was involved got together, that each of those gun crews had independent authority to launch if they felt themselves under threat. So if we had invaded, it would have been the end of the world. So within 10 hours, 130 million Russians would be dead and 30 million Americans. And my uncle kept for 13 days. We were at the brink of that. And the last day, my uncle took a vote. He said, we're going to take the final vote now. And it was 8-6, 8 for invading. And my uncle had questioned the CIA. He said, are those Russian gun crews? If we kill Russians, they said, we think they are. He said, if we kill Russians, isn't Khrushchev going to have to come to Berlin? And he said, give me the aerial maps. I want to see what's happening. So he was questioning it and looking and making his own, listening to the expert, making his own determination. And at the last day, he called a vote, and it was 8-6 in favor of invasion. And he said the Sixes have it. So he was making up his own mind. And that's what we didn't see during COVID. We saw Trump come out and say hydroxychloroquine works, which he was correct about. But then he let them ban it. And he said lockdowns are wrong, which he was correct about. And he said this thing is going to blow through whether we have lockdowns or not. It's a respiratory illness. You can't stop it with a lockdown. And he was right. But he still let his bureaucrats roll over him because he was trusting the experts. And you just don't do that in a democracy.
All right. Next question is more the elephant in the room question. No third-party candidate has been elected president in modern U.S. history. Not Teddy Roosevelt, not George Wallace, not Ross Perot. So what do you want to say to people, and particularly your supporters, that we can tell other people about what's different about you? That how are you going to be elected president, and that a vote for Bobby Kennedy, like my Trumpian friends say, is not going to get Biden elected, or like my Biden friends say, is not going to get Trump elected. What do we tell these folks about how Bobby Kennedy gets elected, and a vote for Bobby Kennedy is not a wasted vote?
Well, first of all, let me question your history, because the first president of the United States was an independent.
I said moderate.
And the 16th president of the United States was Abraham Lincoln. Was also an independent candidate. He created the Republican Party, and he was the first one elected from it. And so we have had we have had people elected, and we've had Teddy Roosevelt came very close to winning as a third-party candidate. But I think we have a different historical situation today. We have the two least popular major party candidates ever in American history since polling began. So each one of them would win the poll as the least popular if he wasn't running against the other guy. We have 70% of the American public who are saying they don't want a contest between President Trump and President Biden. We have, and people who are Democrats and say, oh, you're going to get President Trump elected. What I said to them is President Biden does not need my help to lose to President Trump. The polls now, showing him 4 to 10 points behind. And President Trump doesn't have a cakewalk either. He's facing 91 criminal complaints. And at least one of those is going to go to trial, and he could lose that trial very, very, very easily. And so I am farther ahead than anybody right now. My popularity is 18 to 20 points ahead net popularity, my net favorability to any other candidate. There's nobody else even that they polled that came close, which, by the way, I'm not bragging about that. I'm kind of astonished about it because I've had nothing but bad publicity from the mainstream media. And it's kind of baffling to me. It's really a phenomenon that somehow my popularity has increased, even though I haven't gotten any, until very recently, no good articles about me. I'm already beating President Biden and President Trump in all Americans under 45 years old. In Michigan and the other 5 battleground states. So I'm beating them nationally among everybody under 35. I'm beating them among independent voters, which is the largest cohort. This will be the first election in American history where there are more self-identified independents than either Democrats or Republicans, and I trounced them, both of them, among independents. And I don't think either of them are going to get more popular between now and election day. My popularity is increasing by about 1 point a month. And I'm already in a 3-way tie. Hispanic votes, I'm about a point behind President Biden and maybe 5 points ahead of President Trump, which is another significant cohort. The only cohort where I really do badly on is baby boomers. And baby boomers, if you think about it, I should be most popular with them. The kids who like me, they don't even remember Camelot. They don't know anything about my uncle or father. And the people who remember Camelot were part of the Kennedy era. Those are the baby boomers. And I was also a hero to them for many years as kind of the leading environmental advocate in the country. And they've turned now against me because they're getting their news from CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and then the airwave networks, NBC, ABC, and CBS. And I think that one of the reasons that young people like me is because they get their news from podcasts, from alternative media, from long-form interviews, from Patrick Bet-David, from Joe Rogan, from Aubrey Marcus, from Jordan Peterson, and Lex Friedman, and so and what we find is a lot of these kids tell us, I forced my mom and dad to listen to your Joe Rogan interview and I've converted. So what I think is going to happen is I think right now we're seeing the first cracks in the fortress of the network. And so Michael Schmerkanish allowed me on for my first live interview in probably almost a decade on CNN. And CNN did a good article, or did a good piece about me. NBC did an unbelievable piece about me 2 days ago when I broke 34% of Americans saying they'd be willing to vote for it. By the way, I'm at 27 here. All I need to do technically is get to 34 to win the election, because it's winner take all. If it's a 3-way tie, the person who has 34 wins. The likelihood is if anybody who gets to 39 will win that state. And so, I have I'm gaining and both of them are losing. So I feel like even if we go to a contingent election, which is highly likely, we believe that I will win the contingent election because we don't believe that President Trump or President Biden can get to 26 votes. which is what you need in Congress. If we go to a contingent election, which happens if neither of us get 270 electoral votes, then it goes, the Senate, United States Senate picks the vice president, and the United States Congress picks the president. You only get one vote per state, so a congressional delegation has to agree. And under the 12th Amendment, the winner needs 26 states. And if you, right now, we don't believe either party could get that, and no Democrat is going to switch their vote to Trump because they'll lose their career. And no Republican is going to switch their vote to Biden. They'll lose their career, and that Congress is not allowed to conduct any other business until they agree. We think that they're going to probably have to go to a compromise candidate. So, no, I can easily win that as well.
Sally, since my phone dinged, please silence your phones. Sorry about that. All right, well, let me move on to something that you had already mentioned, and that's sort of the division of the United States. And I know myself, I've watched in the last few years that people have been becoming more and more and more polarized. So what as president would you do to bring us back together, to celebrate our differences the way we used to, rather than using those differences as wedges to drive us apart?
You know, I believe that a lot of the polarization is orchestrated, that they want to keep us at each other's throats because it paralyzes the process and allows it. It's like the jangling keys theory. You know, if you jangle the keys over here and say, look at this, and meanwhile you're robbing the bank over here, and the big corporation, the big investment house like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which are now control both political parties. They also control the network news. They own all of the military contractors, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and Lockheed are all owned by BlackRock. And they own the credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, Chase, Morgan, Citibank. Those are all owned by BlackRock. So we have now $1 trillion in personal debt. The average American, more than half Americans cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. The average wage, the average salary in our country now is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs. And that means the average American is going into $5,000 in debt a year. There's now $1 trillion in credit card debt, and those companies are charging 22% interest minimum. Somebody sent me, a fisherman from Wellfleet sent me a screenshot of his credit card bill a couple of weeks ago, 37% interest. If the mafia did that, they would go to prison, and that'd be called loan sharking. But when BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and the companies they own do it, it's just the cost of doing business, and they're doing it in front of us, and and the way they disable any kind of reaction to what they're doing. What they did to us during COVID, they closed 3.3 million businesses. And without any due process, no just compensation, no scientific citation, no public hearings, no notice and comment rulemaking, no environmental impact statement, all the things I've sued people for, government agencies and corporations for years for not going through that democratic process, and they just didn't do anything. They just had one guy, never been elected, 50 years in office, who said shut down every business in the country with not a single scientific paper to justify it, and hundreds of scientific papers and protocols for managing pandemics. WHO, European Medicines Agency, the CDC, that had protocols, and they all said, whatever you do, do not do mass lockdowns. And he went ahead and did it. And you know, it's just no democracy. And he put 3.3 million businesses out of work. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. Some of them had 3 generations of equity in them. And those communities are shattered. And who did he keep open? Amazon. He gave us a 3-year lesson on how to use Amazon. And and it's magical. You just find a picture of something you like and press send, and it's in your driveway the next day. But the local businesses that were employing our kids in the summer, that were paying local taxes, that were buying our jerseys for the Little League and for hockey, and were part of our community. That money you spent there was recirculating in our communities and building our community. They're gone. And Amazon, is, and guess who owns Amazon? BlackRock. So they're all in it, together. The war machine, and just strip mining the wealth from the American public. And I think we need to put an end to that. And when we're all at each other's throats, when the king and queen go out on the balustrades of their castle and they see everybody fighting each other, all their subjects, they go back to the banquet hall and they pop champagne corks because they know nobody's coming over the wall for them. And what I said in my announcement speech 8 months ago in Boston is that I'm going to put an end to that rancor. I'm not going to feed into it. I'm going to avoid the culture war issues. And I'm going to unify people and dampen the hatred, the rancor, the poison, the toxicity, and then lead everybody over the wall to take back our country. I do that by doing 2 things. One is telling the truth to people, whatever it is, just telling the truth. And the other thing that I try to do is to focus on the issues that we all share in common, the values that we all share in common, rather than these little culture war issues that keep us apart. And when what I found over 8 months of being disciplined about doing that and not, going after President Biden or President Trump personally or their legal problems, and just, showing them respect, the respect of their office. And then focusing on things people care about, what I find is there's this huge landscape of issues that everybody cares about and no other politician is talking about. The chronic disease epidemic, everybody wants to end it. When you start talking about it Callie Means, who's the pharmaceutical executive, was on Tucker this week, and he said something I didn't know. 30 to 35% of kids in our country are pre-diabetic or diabetic, and 60% of adults. And when I was a kid, a pediatrician might see 1 case of juvenile diabetes in their career. Today, it's 1 out of every 3 kids that comes to their door, and nobody's asking, why is this happening? It's now diabetes is now costing us more than our military budget. Nobody's saying why. Nobody's saying where's it coming from. Where's the obesity epidemic coming from? Why did we go from 6% of obese, or 6% of having chronic disease when my uncle was president, 60% today? Neurological, autoimmune, allergic disease, obesity. Obesity went from 13% of kids when my uncle was president, 42 today, almost 50%, and 75% of adults are overweight or obese. And nobody's asking why. Nobody's asking why. In my generation, we have the rate of autism in 70-year-old men is 1 in 10,000. And by autism, I mean full-blown, nonverbal, non-toilet trained, stimming, toe walking, head banging, tactile, and light sensitivities. 1 in 10,000 men my age look like that. With my kids, it's 1 in every 34. 1 in every 22 boys. And nobody's saying why. NIH has never done that study. Where did all these things come from? EPA, Congress said to EPA, tell us what year the autism epidemic began. And EPA came back and said, it's a red line, 1989. So we know we have to look for something, an environmental toxin that began in 1989 and affected every demographic. Pretty easy science to do. There's only a few substances that fit that profile. Phil Landrigan, who's done those studies, has said there's only 13 things that fit that profile. And why are we looking at those and saying which one or ones is it? It's glyphosate from Roundup, it's neonicotinoid pesticides, it's atrazine, it's high fructose corn syrup, it's cell phone radiation, it's the vaccine schedule, which went from 3 when I was a kid to 72 my kids took, and all of those diseases are listed as side effects on their own manufacturer's inserts. So that's got to be one of the culprits, but it's probably all of these things combined. They all operate on similar biological pathways, and it's cumulative. But we need to be eliminated. No other nation in the world has this. Nobody has this like we do. We have the worst chronic disease burden on earth, and that's why one of the reasons we had the highest death rate from COVID. We had 16% of the COVID deaths in our country. We only have 4.2% of the global population. Why are people getting awards for managing this? We literally had the worst record of any country in the world. And CDC says, oh, it wasn't our management choices. It was because Americans are so sick. It's your fault. Because you have the highest chronic disease burden. And CDC says the average person who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic disease. So they had diabetes, they had obesity, they had asthma, and one other thing. Why does nobody else have this and we do? Why isn't anybody answering that question? So Americans agree on that. Americans want to take care of our veterans. Want to have the best education system in the world. They want to end corporate cronyism, this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. They want to, they want to have a clean environment. If all you're going to talk about is climate change, you're going to get a fist fight. But if you want to talk about clean air, clean water, safe drinking water, in Flint, Michigan, you're going to get people agreeing on that, protecting our sacred places. And then there's no Republicans, no Democrats. Everybody wants that.
Okay, I think we're gonna open it up for at least one question from the audience. If somebody has a question, I think over here. Yes.
Thank you. I just first of all wanted to give you pass on some love. We have a mutual friend, Jim Douglas, the author of JFK and the Unspeakable.
What?
And Jim Douglas, the author of JFK and the Unspeakable, I told him I was coming. He asked me to give you his love, and I spoke to pass along for him.
How do you get him on the phone? He never answers the phone.
You leave a message on his answering machine.
He
It's
doesn't
old
have a
school.
cell phone.
No, he doesn't, but he will call you back. So, anyway, in the spirit of that, I wanted to ask you a question about the CIA. We know that your uncle wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the wind, and tragically, he didn't have the opportunity to do that. And seemingly, they still maintain kind of unchecked power. And really, it seems like until they no longer have immunity from accountability, they're going to continue down this path of global interference. And wanted to know what you plan to do as president to reel in the CIA, to get control so that we can have world peace and that we can ensure that they're not undermining your administration like they have past administrations in our country.
Yeah. That's a good question. And it's something that is at the forefront of my mind all the time about how to, and my father, a week before he died, Pete Hamill asked him, well, what are you going to do with the CIA? How are you going to get control? My uncle had tried to figure it out too. My uncle, right after the Bay of Pigs, he figured out it was the huge problem, that it was no longer serving the American interests, that it was serving the interests of the military-industrial complex and providing this constant pipeline of new wars. And he said at that point, that famous quote that you reference, he publicly took blame for the Bay of Pigs catastrophe when the men were dying on the beach and being arrested by Castro. But privately, he said to his aides, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. Because he knew he'd been lied to. He knew Dulles lied to, and he fired Dulles. He fired Richard Bissell, who was the other, and George Cabela, who was the the general at the CIA, the military, the head of the military operations. And then my uncle asked for, first of all, my uncle asked my father to be CIA director because he said there's no way to get a handle on this agency, and the only way he could figure out was to put his brother in charge. My grandfather intervened at that point and said you cannot have the President of the United States with his brother as the head of a secret spy agency. The optics around the world are terrible. It will be like Molotov and Stalin. The relationship there's too much nepotism. It's a terrible precedent, and you can't do it. So they brought in a guy who was a great manager of business, John McComb. He was a Republican, very pious Catholic, and he he got to the CIA and nobody ever told him what was going on in the agency. Oh, in fact, E. Howard Hunt at one time would ask if McComb and my father were told about the assassination projects under Castro. And he said, there's certain things that a president and a CIA director don't want to know. So, that was their justification. So, but my uncle then did a memo, ordered a memo, and Arthur Schlesinger and Dick Goodwin did it. And that memo, interestingly, was one of the last documents that have been released by the Kennedy assassination, under the Kennedy Assassination Documents Act, which they're supposed to release everything 5 years ago, and and Biden promised to do it, Trump promised to do it, and then they get in there and they don't do it, which is weird. Because why would Donald Trump not do it? What did they say to Donald Trump? Because he promised the whole election, I'm going to release these documents. And then he got in there and he said, no, I'm not going to do it. But why? He didn't like the CIA. He was on odds with them. So why wouldn't he release it? I don't know the answer to that question. But anyway, I will release it. I'm going to release, I think we should have transparency. Somebody asked me the other day, do you believe in UFOs? I said, I don't know. I've never seen one. And I don't know. I don't know what to believe. I see a lot of these whistleblowers coming forward who are like big shots in the military who are saying that. But I said, here's what I can tell you. If there are UFOs and the U.S. government knows about it, you're going to know about it the day after I get back. All of those documents are going to be released. But my father, so President Kennedy did have a plan for reorganizing the CIA. It was a very good plan, and that document just got released. My father was going to told Pete Hamill the same thing. He said, we need to separate the espionage division from the plans division. The plans division is the dirty tricks division. That's the division that does the political assassinations, it does the regime changes, it does the fixing elections, it does bribing labor unions, controlling the press, Operation Mockingbird, which they now have again since 2016. They're the biggest funder of journalism around the world, about $10 billion a year. And they're not supposed to be doing that in our country. Under their charter, it's illegal to propagandize the American people. They admitted in 1973 that they were doing it anyway with Operation Mockingbird. They had 400 of the top reporters and editors in our country on their payroll. And when that came out before Congress, it's called the family jewels, their big secrets were all revealed. They said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And we have no idea what they did between then and 2016. But in 2016, Obama passed an executive order allowing them again to propagandize the American people. So now, I see their fingerprints on many things. There's article after article for anybody who wants to research it. Dick Russell, who's an historian, who did a recent series of articles showing how a lot of major news organizations are controlled by the agency, and those include Rolling Stone, Noah Schlachman, the editor who came out of the intelligence agency. It used to be a counterculture production, and now it's, it's just the center of COVID promotion and pandemic response and militarism and attack Ukraine, war everywhere. National Geographic, Scientific American, Daily Beast, Daily Kos, I forget some of the other ones, but it's an interesting article. I recommend people read it. My father wanted to separate the two because what happened at the espionage division is critical function of the CIA. That's information gathering and analytics, and the president needs to have that information or he can't make decisions that are informed by facts. And then the other division is the plans division, which does all these dirty tricks, and unfortunately they're wed together. So the clandestine activities tail is now wagging the espionage dog. So the espionage service, basically, the function of it is to justify actions that for the plans division to conduct or to justify them in retrospect. There's never any accountability at the CIA. The CIA, if the CIA kills a ISIS leader with a drone attack, that's a victory. Okay, and that's how it's always accounted. But what if he had a wife and children and 12 brothers now, who are all now strapping on suicide vests or running jihads of their own? Is the long-term, is the long-term cause of that action? Is that an action averting of a long-term or causing more problems? Those questions are never answered. Our problem, the problem in Gaza right now, why did that happen? It happened because we overthrew Saddam Hussein. Because Saddam Hussein was the bulwark against the Sunni in Iran. It was the bulwark against Iran. And they just finished fighting a million man casualty, 1 million people dead. And with between Iraq and Iran, for years we were supporting Saddam Hussein because he was standing against Iran. Iran's Shia. Iraq was mainly Shia, but a small number of Sunnis led by Saddam Hussein who were controlling the Shia, revolutionary fervor. As soon as he was eliminated, Iraq became a proxy of Iran, and it allowed them to use it as a base for expansion across the region. So now they are funding the Houthis, they're funding Islamic Jihad in Lebanon, they're funding the Hezbollah in Lebanon, they fund Hamas in Gaza. But what happened in Gaza is a direct result, and those troops that got killed recently in Syria, the American troops on the Syrian-Jordan border, why are they there? They're there allegedly to fight ISIS. ISIS is the biggest enemy of Iran. That's what's left of Saddam's original army. We're fighting Iran. We're supposedly, that's our big enemy in the Mideast, but we're also trying to kill ISIS, which is the biggest enemy of Iran. That's why we have those kids up on that border. It makes no sense. And we had to put them there because Saddam used to control that area, and he's gone, so we had to replace his group with our troops. And so that accountability never happens in the CIA. All the problems we had with Iran right now today come from when the CIA overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953. The first democratically elected leader in 8,000-year history of Iran. And we overthrew him because he tried to he tried to give a better cut of the oil revenues to his people. And we said he can't do that. And we overthrew him, and we put, the Shah there. And the Shah's totalitarian authoritarianism led to Ayatollah Khomeini, and we're still dealing with that. So, in a real intelligence agency, They would look at the long-term blowback from their actions, and it never happens in the CIA. So what my father wanted to do was to separate the plans division from the espionage division. So the espionage division would be looking over the shoulder and doing analysis and say, yeah, you killed that guy, but because of that, there's 50 more of them now out there. That never happens. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna split them up. And you know what? I have the best advisor on this, which is my daughter-in-law, Amaryllis Fox, who's beloved, and people will tell you who work for the campaign, she should actually be running for president, not me. She's probably the smartest person I've ever met. And her career was in the clandestine services at the CIA. She was a spy in the Weapons of Mass Destruction Division. She was a spy in the Mideast, in Pakistan, in China. She had a commercial cover. She was pretended for years to be an art dealer, so she actually had to start a company to sell art and make profits on it. And then she started another commercial cover was a tech startup, which she made a successful tech startup. Sold that, she left the agency and went to Twitter as a high-level executive at Twitter. And then, she left and has spent the rest of her life fighting the war machine. And she, has thought deeply about this. When what Amaryllis says, he said there's 20,000 people at the CIA, and 99% of them are patriots and great public servants. And then there's the upper echelon. And I'll tell you one last thing, because 2 months ago I was in Las Vegas, and in a bizarre set of synchronicities and circumstances, I ended up having dinner with Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo is a guy that I knew from a distance only. I never met him, but I never liked him because I thought of him as a warmonger, the worst of the kind of neocons. But he's incredibly charming. He's incredibly brilliant. He went to Harvard Business School. He went to Harvard undergraduate. He was the head of the CIA. He was the director or Secretary of State. But he was in the military. He has the best resume that you've ever seen on anybody. He's brilliant man, and I believe him to be very sincere and a straight shooter. He just disagrees with me. I think he's sincere about what he believes in. And what he said something to me during this dinner. He said, to me, the biggest regret in my life is that I did not fix the CIA, and I had an opportunity to do that. He said, I did nothing to reform it. And he turned to me and he said, the entire upper echelon of that agency is made up of individuals who do not believe in the democratic institutions of the United States of America. Oh, and I think that's true. And I would urge any of you who have not seen Tucker's interview with Putin to go look at that, because he was in the KGB, right? So he knows a lot about how the CIA works, and I've been talking for many months now about how this Ukraine war is a CIA project from top to bottom. And he gave a lot of detail. He confirmed everything I've been saying, but he gave a lot of detail. And whether you believe Putin or not, my uncle always said that if you want peace, you have to be able to put yourself in your opponent's shoes. And my uncle, in hotline, when my uncle was president, the CIA knew nothing about what was happening in the Kremlin. Why? Because there was a mole in Langley. And every time they turned somebody from the high level upper echelons of the Kremlin, that person would be murdered within 24 hours. So we never had any spies in the Kremlin. We had no eyes. And the CIA's view of what was happening in the Kremlin was that they were a monolith intent on world domination. And everybody was in agreement. There was no dissent. And my uncle was like, that's just not the way things work. He said, it's got to be like Boston, where everybody's fighting each other in the political realm all the time. It's just how human nature works. It's how politics. You have people struggling for control. They have different agendas, different ideals, different ideologies. And he said, it can't be what they're saying. Well, then, he met Khrushchev at Vienna, and they had a really disastrous talk where Khrushchev was full of bombast. My uncle's trying to reach out to him. And then after the Checkpoint Charlie crisis, when we almost went to war over Berlin, 2 tank divisions facing each other down, and my uncle said to Khrushchev, Khrushchev said, I can't back down. They started privately corresponding with each other, and Khrushchev said, I can't back down, my back's to the wall. And he was telling my uncle, I'm in the same place you are. I'm surrounded by military-industrial complex who consider war not only inevitable, but desirable. And he began writing letters to my uncle, and there was a spy when I was a little kid who used to visit my house all the time, and his name was Georgy Bolshakov, and my father and my mother had met him at a cocktail party at the Soviet embassy, and they were charmed by him. He was incredibly funny. He was fun to be around. He was very lively. When I was a kid, we all knew he was a KGB spy, a GRU spy, and it was the time the James Bond films just came out, so it was pretty cool having a Soviet spy in our house. And he would do the Cossack dancing, and he would do rope climbing, and he had push-up contests with my father. And my uncle and father really trusted him. And Khrushchev trusted him. So Khrushchev knew he could not trust his own. Khrushchev and my uncle had both been to war. Khrushchev was at Stalingrad, the worst battle of World War II. And my uncle, of course, was lost at sea. His ship was sunk. And they both did not want to go back into war. And they found each other amidst all of these warmongers. And he started sending these letters to my uncle. He sent 26 letters to each other. And they're very, very personal letters talking about their children and how, we all live on an ark. And that if the ark sinks, we all die. And that their job was to make sure that their children did not pay for the parents' mistakes. They started writing these letters and smuggling them. Georgy Bolshakov would bring them to President Kennedy in a New York Times folded and give them to Pierre Salinger, to my dad. And then my uncle installed the hotline. So when I was growing up, there was a red phone at the White House on the Oval Office desk, and then there was another one in our home in Cape Cod. And we knew not to touch that phone because Khrushchev would answer if you picked it up. But they were able to start communicating with each other. And that's something that's never happened with Biden and Putin. He's just like Khrushchev, a comic book villain, right? Which is what they did to Saddam Hussein, and they do it to anybody they want to go. They turn them into a comic book. And these are not nice guys. They're not great guys. But he's not a madman. Just go look at this at his interview. He's very rational, and you can hear what he's saying. That to me, whether you believe him or not, he clearly believes himself, and he clearly has a rationale. And we need to listen to him, even if you don't believe him, even if you think he's a terrible, terrible human being. It's really important because he leads a nation of 120 million people, and they have more nuclear weapons we do, and much, 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 much better nuclear weapons. They have hypersonic weapons, much that dwarf ours. They can massacre us in a nuclear exchange. They have 1,000 more than we do, and they have a technology that we are not even close to. And he talks about that in this interview. And it's, Americans should listen to it, because our leaders are not telling us the truth, and they're not listening. And the Democratic Party does not believe that, we can handle dangerous thoughts anymore. And, they're condemning Tucker Carlson for doing that interview. Mike Wallace interviewed Ayatollah Khomeini, and Christiane Amanpour interviewed Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. And that's what we do in America. We talk to people, and then let's have the debate.
I could listen to this, sorry, we're gonna have to cut it off. I could listen to this man for the rest of the night, but I think his staff would have me summarily executed. So let me bring Trish up to close us up.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kennedy and Dr. Neuenschwander. That was a great conversation, and thank you all for coming and donating so generously tonight. I'd like to give a special thanks to Kathy and the staff at the Italian American Banquet Center, along with the musicians, for making it so special. On your way out, we are going to do a quick selfie. Have your camera out and ready, and we will have staff members that will take it, but there's no talking. They're gonna rush you right through for a quick photo. It's essential that we get Mr. Kennedy on the ticket here in Michigan, on the ballot, I'm sorry, here in Michigan. You can visit his campaign's website at kennedy24.com to see how you can help volunteer and or help get signatures for the petition. We also would greatly appreciate any additional donations if you'd like to give those. There will be volunteers in the lobby that can assist with donations. We hope that Mr. Kennedy enjoyed his time here in the Great Lakes state of Michigan this weekend. We know that with all of your help, we will be one of the states that will push him over the finish line into the White House. Have a wonderful evening.